My health's been declining recently. To support my mother-in-law with her health issues, our family decided to temporarily live in her house, and so began our days of being constantly bossed around by my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. Then, one day, as my husband was driving, a call came in from my mother-in-law on his cell phone. Because of the poor signal, we put the call on speaker mode. Is she still alive? Stubborn, isn't she?
If I wasn't there, she might have seriously been dead.
Unaware that they were on a call, the two began their alarming conversation. And just like that, their sinister plan crumbled. Next, they were to receive social penalties for their outrageous actions. My name is Wendy. I live happily with my husband Tony and our beloved daughter Vicky. Our daughter has recently started kindergarten, and she seems to be having a great time every day. Seeing her like this brings a smile to my face each day. Then one day, my husband got a call from my mother-in-law, Barbara. My health's been declining recently, she said in a weak voice. Barbara had suffered a stroke in the past, leaving her with a slight paralysis in her limbs. That being said, her symptoms were not severe, and she was able to live her life without major inconvenience, walking around with a cane. According to her, the after effects of the stroke seemed to be causing her pain. It's hard to live like this. I'm not getting any younger, and if something were to happen, I might not be as lucky as your father was, Barbara continued nervously. What about we all live at your place until your health stabilizes? Catching me off guard. What about your brother, Matt? As far as I knew, Matt, Tony's brother, was living with my mother-in-law. But according to her, Matt was busy job hunting and she didn't feel secure with him alone. I was torn. To be honest, I didn't get along well with Barbara. She always had a lot to say, and I had experienced her being rather harsh towards me in the past. But it wasn't just me who had issues with my mother-in-law. My husband, Tony, didn't exactly have the best relationship with his mother either. Apparently, she had always favored Matt, the eldest son, while Tony was treated as if he were an afterthought. When I broached the topic, Tony replied with a troubled look. That's true, but still, I am her son. Indeed, this seemed like a sentiment typical of Tony, a man of strong responsibility. Out of respect for my husband, I agreed to the temporary move to my in-laws' house. Moving homes is a big deal. Fortunately, our home and the in-laws' home aren't too far apart. Our daughter Vicky probably won't even need to change her kindergarten. Also, Vicky herself seems fairly excited about the idea. So I convinced myself, thinking, it's just until Barbara's health improves. With that, we started our life at my in-laws' house. But my burden turned out to be more than I expected. First off, the house itself is pretty old, and its size means housework is quite a struggle. The time required for cleaning is off the charts. What's more, the volume of cooking and laundry has nearly doubled. I was under the impression that I'd just be helping my mother-in-law, but in reality, most of the housework fell on my shoulders. And while I was working hard, my mother-in-law was... Vicky, darling, it's such a lovely day. Why don't we go shopping together? I want to come. And off she'd go, enthusiastically spending time with her granddaughter. And then, you see, that painting of Matt's won a gold medal. Oh, really? That's interesting. Alright, are you really listening? This is the amazing part. She'd ramble on endlessly about trivial past achievements of her favorite son, all while munching on snacks. To be honest, it was seriously annoying. She seems to be in great shape. How is she in poor health? I eyed my mother-in-law with suspicion. Suddenly, she started coughing as if she was startled. Am I imagining the insincerity here? Well, let's end my rant about my mother-in-law here. Next is about my brother-in-law. He was also a significant pain in the neck. Contrary to the stories I'd heard, Matt turned out to be a jobless singleton almost entirely dependent on his parents. And his thoughts and actions were so childish. It was hard to believe he was a man in his 40s.
Wendy, I'm hungry. Where's my lunch? Wendy, why didn't you wake me up? I missed my favorite show.
I found myself catering to him as well. Even Vicky, my daughter, helps out around the house. He seemed to think he was entitled to having others look after him. I'm not your wife nor your mother. I screamed inside my head. The fact that he called me Wendy Darling was also creepy. Moreover, there was something unnerving about the way he looked at me. So, I was leading a tough life, both physically and emotionally due to these two people. But, one night, several relatives had gathered for a drinking party at our home. I went upstairs to fetch a fan to improve the ventilation in the living room. The fan should be around here somewhere.
Wendy!
When I turned around, my brother-in-law was standing behind me out of nowhere. Then, with a smirk on his face, he said something unbelievable.
Why don't you ditch boring Tony and start over with me?
I couldn't believe my ears, but it seemed I had heard him right. He was ogling me with a lascivious grin on his face. He might have been emboldened by alcohol, but his remark was disgustingly crude to the extreme. Brother-in-law, you're clearly too drunk. That's not funny, even as a joke.
Huh? Are you saying you want to reject me? I might spill your secret to Tony, you know.
What? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm busy, so I'm gonna leave now. With that, I tried to ignore him and head downstairs, but he forcefully grabbed my arm out of the blue.
Come on, I'm way better than Tony.
Stop it! Just stop! Startled, I jerked my arm away from my brother-in-law. Unexpectedly, Matt lost his footing due to my sudden resistance. He tumbled down the stairs, ultimately hitting the back of his head against the wall with a groan. Hearing the commotion, Tony and other relatives rushed over.
Hey, what's going on here?
Oh, Matt just slipped.
Oh my, look at the bump on his head!
While his mother fretted over him, shaking him violently, other family members managed to calm her down and took Matt to another room for first aid. Amid all the confusion, my quarrel with Matt was forgotten. I contemplated whether to tell Tony about Matt's advances, but decided to stay silent for now, not wanting to cause unnecessary worry. If Matt's actions escalated, I would speak up. With that thought, I made my way towards the living room where everyone was gathered. Then, in the corner of the hallway, I saw Vicky looking at me with a worried expression. I'm sorry if I scared you, honey. Did I wake you up? Let's get you back to bed. Okay. Something about Vicky's demeanor felt off. But it was late and I didn't question further, taking her to her room to put her back to bed. Life remained difficult due to my mother-in-law and Matt. Every day, I was forced to entertain my mother-in-law's uninteresting chatter and attend to my immature brother-in-law's needs. I felt like running away. However, Matt hadn't made any more advances since that incident. It seemed he had learned his lesson after my strong rebuff. With that, I felt a bit relieved and carried on with my life at my in-laws. But then, on a particular day, another unexpected incident befell me. I was having lunch with my mother-in-law as usual, when I suddenly felt dizzy after eating some tomato soup. Next, I was hit with intense nausea and difficulty breathing. I recognized this sensation. Yes, it was anaphylactic shock, an allergic reaction. I have a severe allergy to peanuts, and if I consume even a single one, I can have breathing difficulties. Luckily, my brother-in-law was home so we could quickly call an ambulance. Seeing me in distress, he rushed to pull out his smartphone, his fingers seeming to falter. It looked as though he had become too flustered to remember the number. When I managed to gasp out, 911! He finally started pressing the buttons on his phone. Despite some fumbling, he managed to call an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital where my life was saved. Lying in the hospital bed, I thanked my brother-in-law. Thank you, brother.
Oh, thank you so much. You saved Wendy's life.
Tony cried, tears in his eyes as he grasped his brother's hand. Taken aback, my brother-in-law replied, a bit bashfully,
Well, I just did what any person would do.
Although I was annoyed to admit it, even such a despicable person can be useful at times. I had to admit, I saw him in a slightly different light after that. But, as much as I felt gratitude towards my brother-in-law, something else was bothering me. Why had I had an allergic reaction? Afterward, I stayed in the hospital for observation for one day. The next day, I was discharged without any complications and got into the car that Tony was driving to return to my in-laws' house. In the car, my daughter Vicky asked with concern, Are you okay, Mom? Yes, I'm fine now. I'm sorry for worrying you. I thought my heart was going to stop when I heard you had been taken to the hospital. I was careful with those ingredients, though, I said, tilting my head. Just then, Tony's phone rang.
Oh, it's Mom.
Because he was driving, he quickly switched to speakerphone. However, it seemed like there was a problem with the connection, and we couldn't hear what she was saying clearly.
Hello? That's strange.
After a few seconds, we finally entered a stable call mode, but it seemed my mother-in-law hadn't noticed. She spoke to my brother-in-law Matt with a troubled voice.
Seems the call got cut off. Can't Tony even answer the phone properly? He's really useless.
Their conversation made our faces go pale.
And she's still alive? She's really stubborn, isn't she? Mom, you shouldn't be saying things like that. If I hadn't been there, she might have really died. Doesn't matter. It's just karma for hurting my precious Matt. Oh! Well, I did think it served her right. So, what are we going to do about Wendy? Yeah, I'll try to win her over again. I think I can make it work this time. I mean, she probably fell for me again after this incident. After all, I'm her lifesaver, aren't I?
Unaware that they were being heard, they continued their alarming conversation. Meanwhile, Tony and I were left speechless, exchanging glances. Later, we arrived at my in-laws' house later than scheduled.
You sure took your time. Tony, you should have answered the phone. I wanted you to get something on your way back.
They greeted us as if nothing had happened. On the other hand, Tony and I had stern looks on our faces. Well, we had to stop by the police station.
Police station? Did you lose something?
Vicky, your dad and I need to have a serious talk. Can you go to your room for a bit?
Sure.
As our daughter headed for her room, I thrust Tony's phone towards my in-laws. Then I replayed their conversation that had been recorded. As a matter of fact, I had quickly set Tony's phone to record mode at the time. Upon hearing this, my in-laws' face turned pale with shock.
What? How did you...
I continued glaring at the two who wore guilty expressions. What in the world is going on here?
Well, that was just a joke. Sort of a small payback for you rejecting Matt. Stop it, Mom. Don't mention...
My brother-in-law stammers, trying to stop his mother from digging herself deeper, but it was already too late.
What? She rejected Matt? What's this about?
As I explained to my husband, his normally gentle face transformed into something monstrous. Then he furiously started questioning his mother and brother. Before his onslaught, they confessed everything. It turned out that my mother-in-law was attempting to set me up with Matt. Worse still, he seemed to be on board with the plan. So, she had feigned illness to lure me to their house. The idea of trying to turn her daughter-in-law into her son's fiancé was so outlandish, I was chilled to my bones. The reason for this bizarre plan? They felt sorry for Matt, being single despite being the older brother. Their lack of empathy was so astounding, I could hardly believe they were human. Needless to say, their selfish scheme did not pan out, and Matt ended up tumbling down the stairs in a pitiful fashion. As I remembered the events, I shuddered. At the same time, something my brother-in-law had said stuck in my mind. What secret about me were you using as a threat? With a side glance at my husband, he grudgingly replied,
It was about that $50K you were hiding.
It appeared he was after my personal wealth as well, but he was way off the mark. He and my mother-in-law assumed that I was secretly earning money through stock trading or foreign exchange, but in reality, the money was from my hobby of writing, which I'd been doing for some time. In other words, it was a savings account approved by my husband, not some hidden wealth. He's always told me,
That money is something you earned with your own hard work, Wendy. You can use it whenever you think it's necessary.
Apparently, my brother-in-law had seen my bank book by chance when he visited our house and told his mother about it.
Why not make her your wife then?
She had suggested. Indeed, it's quite a horror story. Anyway, the plot between the two of them was quickly thwarted. As for my mother-in-law, it seems she was in revenge mode because I not only rejected Matt's advances, but also caused him to get injured. So, she conspired with Matt to mix peanut powder into my lunch. She probably thought that they could retrieve the $50,000 later, but seeing me suffering more than he expected, Matt became frightened and hurriedly called an ambulance. By the way, It seems my mother-in-law had been trying to get the passcode for the bank account from Vicky all this time. Of course, there was no way my daughter would know the number, so it was a wasted effort. But she seemed to be filling my daughter's head with nonsense like,
Mommy is doing something wrong to make money. Grandma will take care of it. Oh, don't tell Mommy about this. If you do, she might get arrested by the police.
That day, the mystery of my daughter's strange behavior towards me was finally solved.
What were you thinking? Scaring your own grandchild like that? Aren't you ashamed of trying to steal your younger brother's wife? I always thought you were a fool, but I never expected this.
As Tony voiced his anger and disbelief, his fists trembling, Matt, perhaps feeling his pride hurt, retorted,
Hey, don't get cheeky just because you're my younger brother. I'm way more handsome than you. If I had met Wendy before you did, she would have definitely married me.
This further fueled Tony's anger, but there was someone even angrier than my husband. Yes, that was me.
You have got to be kidding. Tony is a decent human being unlike you. There's no way I would marry a deluded jerk like you, even if hell freezes over. You middle-aged narcissist. Grow up and stop adding darling to my name.
Before I knew it, I was shouting every insult I could think of. Matt seemed to shrink under my intense glare and harsh words. Regaining my composure, I cleared my throat and told them in a calm voice, Anyway, your actions have crossed the line. I almost died, so I will be filing a criminal complaint for assault. Please pay the damages.
I consulted at the local police station earlier. They advised me to discuss this with you first since we're family, but I have no intention of doing that now. No way. You're going to sue us?
Faced with our wrath, the two of them were pale as a ghost, prostrating themselves on the ground. Then they started to plead with us in trembling voices, trying to get us to drop the lawsuit.
Wait, we didn't think you'd be hurt that badly. Yeah, that's right. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. Forgive us. We're family, right?
At their pleas, Tony and I exchanged looks and started discussing. Just then, Vicky entered the room. Perhaps she was bothered by the commotion. Suddenly, my mother-in-law said with a forced smile,
Oh, come on, Vicky. We're a little busy right now. Let's go back to your room.
At that moment, I hastily called out to my daughter, Did you by chance tell your grandma about Mommy's peanut allergy? Yes, she told me to tell her about you, so I said that even one peanut would make it impossible for you to breathe and you'd die. As I gently stroked my daughter's head, I then sent a cold glare at the two of them. There's no room for sympathy here. Accept your social sanctions quietly. And so, the two of them, cast aside by me, were stunned and fell apart on the spot. Later, we hired a lawyer and formally charged my mother and brother-in-law with assault. Because it was a family dispute, they didn't end up in prison, but they had to pay about 13 grand for my medical expenses, compensation, and the like. Naturally, neither of them had any savings to cover this, having led such a dissolute life. In the end, they reluctantly sold their family home for cash and made the payment. And as for the two of them now without a home,
Oh, it's going to be a little cramped in that house if all 5 of us are going to live there. Tony, when are we going to do the extension and remodeling?
unbelievably, they seemed fully prepared to live in our house. These people are truly hopeless. Of course, such a ridiculous proposal wouldn't stand a chance. What kind of nonsense are you spouting? Talk in your sleep when you're asleep. It was probably an explosion of pent-up frustration. The two of them, vehemently rejected by us, hastily left the scene. We heard that they later rented a room in a rundown apartment. They are said to be living a tough life, surviving on the wages my brother-in-law earns from his part-time job. On the other hand, we had returned to our own home for the first time in half a year. Such a peaceful atmosphere. I breathed a sigh of relief.
I'm sorry. It's my fault for deciding to live together. I should have thought more about it.
Don't worry about it. It's your seriousness that I like. That's why I married you. Yes, my husband Tony often gets the short end of the stick due to his serious nature. But that's why... No, precisely because of that. I respect him. I continued speaking to my dejected husband. You looked brave and cool when you punched Matt. Violence isn't good, though. Hearing that, my husband chuckled sheepishly. Then, as he was holding our daughter, he said,
That's right. How about we all go out for some fun next week?
Vicky, where do you want to go? The zoo! Watching my daughter laugh with excitement, I savored the happiness, and I made a vow to continue saving that money for my daughter's future. I promise.